music was a little loud there in my earbobs.
Yeah,
it was
turn it loud.
off. Welcome
Thanks.
to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, just you. Just you're the only one I'm welcoming. No, welcome everybody to the show, the Terror Talk Show. Today on the show, we are talking about the psychology of slasher films, and this was chosen specifically for Dr. Barrett because slasher films are her favorite.
I mean, I love all horror, but
know.
slasher films were the introduction to horror for me.
We all have our favorite genres.
And they're fun. I think one of the reasons I like them so much is because they're still close enough-ish to reality, but they're not so close to reality that you can't put one on and just like unwind. So for example, I don't put Saw on to unwind, but I'll put Halloween on.
Real?
Yeah, but I'll put Halloween on.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's different. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, right? I'm not just going to talk about my personal feelings.
No?
No.
I like slashers too. I don't like them as much as you, though. So I'm interested in learning about them. And I know that later you're going to tell us some of your favorites. And I'm wondering if they jive with mine or if they jive with the audiences. Because I think there's so many contemporary slashers now, because I know you're going to go into the origins of it and everything, and then we're all as horror fans, we're very familiar with sort of 70s and 80s and what happened there and how we went slasher-tastic. But I'm just interested in how it all lines up. But I also know that you have some very loud grunge roots there.
Are we going to start with the questions?
Why don't we do some facts?
Okay.
Yeah, and then because you're going to get into it's going to be a whole slasher thing. And I don't want to interrupt you when you're doing all that.
Number 1.
Oh, boy.
This horror, not horror.
Actor?
Although they might have been a whore, was also a Broadway star when he hit the silver screen. He could not escape his most famous role. He passed away in 1992.
Ah. Okay.
Number 2. Which famous horror actor was associated with best-selling author Stephen King, who contributed to the success of his acting career by promoting his films on social media?
So it's an actor that's like somehow associated to King.
Yeah,
and that King supported so much that he did social media stuff.
It helped
Got it.
boost this guy.
Got it.
Number 3. The Glasgow smile is the term assigned to wounds that are the result of 2 cuts connecting someone's ears to the corners of their mouth. Dubbed this term because of its prevalent use among Scottish gangs in the 1920s and 30s. Which famous unsolved case made the mark infamous?
Okay.
Number 4. If a human body is fed to the pigs,
Okay, Saw.
they will devour everything but what?
Oh, God. I'm thinking of Saw. I'm also thinking of the Silence of the Lambs sequel. Okay.
And number 5, Dick Smith, the Oscar-winning makeup artist for The Exorcist, mentored this horror director.
Oh, well, that's kind of cool. Thank you so much for that.
You're so fucking welcome. The slasher, which I will describe to you what that is in a moment, Shannon.
Oh, God, I can't wait.
But we were just talking, you just said a moment ago, so I just wanted to maybe categorize this a little bit.
All right.
People usually think of the 70s and 80s because in the States, in the United States of America, to be specific, that's when we really that's when they blew up.
Yeah, for America, that's what we remember.
Yeah. But there's actually a slasher canon that can be divided into 3 eras.
Okay.
So the classical, which is what we were talking about, which goes from 1974 to 1993. And then we have the the self-referential from 1994 to 2000, and then the neo-slasher cycle from 2000. This only goes up to 2013.
So we're in a new one now. We just haven't been named yet.
I believe so. So, and it makes sense because if you look at the different tropes and messages and all of that, it does change. And the way even gender is represented in the slasher film changes. So they've undergone a lot of different changes since their inception.
I bet.
Yes. What is a slasher? What is a slasher film? The slasher film is a horror subgenre that meets certain criteria, right?
Yeah.
We need an effective killer. We usually have a pretty fucking high body count.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, there's a few exceptions to this, we have non-firearm weapons.
Right. Machetes and things.
Poison, machetes, fires.
Well, that's why when in the most recent Scream they started using a gun, I was like, what?
Yeah. What?
Stop it.
What is this?
You're breaking rules here.
Well, maybe they're
there
the
are
next
rules.
canon.
There are rules.
Well, there are. And Jamie Kennedy makes us understand that in Scream. There are rules. Okay. So these criteria can sometimes be open to interpretation or debate, but those are our basic requirements. So if we had to look at a formula, slasher films adhere to a, most often what we'll see is like a past wrongful action, which causes severe trauma that is reinforced by either a commemoration or anniversary that then reactivates or re-inspires the killer. So if you watch any slasher that you can think of, what we know is the killer in some ways has either physically or metaphorically arisen after a period of time, and oftentimes it's because they were either wronged or traumatized in a way that they are now coming back for their revenge.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't the case in most every other horror genre, right? So
Right.
it is this, it's a revenge.
Right.
So where did all this start?
Yeah, we're always kind of looking for motive in slashers,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
all right, so as a watcher, I'm always like, okay, so how's he killing them, and why is he killing them, and what are we looking for, and what's this guy's trauma?
Well, right. And
Who hurt you?
And through that process of, deduction,
Yeah.
that's
the
oftentimes
fun of it for me.
Well, and one of the things I love about slasher films is it's a puzzle,
Yeah.
right? So it's one of the only, I don't like watching a movie when someone's like, okay, this is what's happening. Let me just watch it. Let me just be in this moment.
Yeah.
And suspension of disbelief. I want to feel like I'm in it. I don't want to try to guess it. In the majority of movies.
Yeah, yeah.
But something I do love about the slasher is that it's an intentional puzzle with a bunch of red herrings that you are sitting there trying to kind of check boxes off like the game of Clue.
Yep.
Right? So I think that's cool.
And I think that's why when people watch horror together, that is why some people will want to try to guess it, or some people will want to sort of say like, well, didn't she do this earlier? And so that must mean that like you're wanting to share the puzzle with others.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why they do it, because we're all trying to figure out the puzzle.
Well, and one of the things that we know, we've talked about, and we're going to talk about psychology of horror later in the season, but we know that one of the reasons why horror films are so great for mood and dopamine and all that stuff is the paired association that we have between watching that movie and then having that conversation with our friends, right? A lot of movies people will talk about together, but horror really there's a community discussion about it after. Who was afraid? Who did they think it was?
Yeah.
That's very different from how did you feel about Brokeback Mountain?
Yeah, that's very
Right?
different.
It's different.
What came up for you?
What came up for you? So the origin for those of us born in America or have lived here most of our lives, especially if you're at a certain age where slashers were a big part of your horror experience, we assume, or many people assume, that the origin of slasher is actually us. And I would say that there's a subtle truth to that, which we certainly took. We are a derivative of a larger we're a subgenre of a larger genre that actually started and had its roots in either German films, crime films, and Italian gialli. And when I started to get more into the history of slasher, that's really when I found giallo. And I started, and I know there's a fun joke that we have because I love saying giallo. Yeah. But
sorry for the yelling.
As a slasher fan, it was really interesting to go back and watch some of these. And one of them is actually on my top 5.
Great.
So it was, people found an appeal of watching others inflict violence upon each other. And this dates back thousands of years to ancient Rome, though fictionalized accounts become marketable with late 19th century horror plays produce a number of folks. And then you have what is known to be, and there is some debate around this, but known to be the first deemed slasher in America would be John Carpenter's Halloween.
Yeah.
Right? And some people will argue that there are slashers that came out before that. I do have some on my list as well.
I'm sure.
But for most people, they'll say, okay, this is when we said this is now a genre.
Yeah.
Okay. So I also want to make sure that we don't forget to mention Carol Clover, who wrote the book Men, Women, and Chainsaws. And she wrote this decades ago. She was really ahead of her time. And she's the one who coined the term final girl. And this was a really influential study of gender in the horror film, because one of the things that is, especially with that first canon of 1974 to 1993, horror was made for young males, right? Because early giallo and slasher, the vantage point, the camera was the killer, and the killer was actually the center of the film. So not to say that only all males are killers, but males tend to be more labeled as the predator in many of these situations. And it was written as, an outlet for males.
Well, and the Halloween, the famous POV shots that are,
that's right.
It's like.
Yeah. And so you have.
From the killer's perspective.
From the killer's perspective. And then women were highly sexualized, objectified, killed in really, really humiliating ways. When you go back and you watch a lot of the 1970s torture porn and then some of the early 1980s, the way that women were used in horror was very different than what we see now. And so her commentary on that is really interesting. So if you haven't read the book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws, it's really great. And she will go into a lot of like the I Spit on Your Grave and when women start to have these revenge fantasies. The tactics that are oftentimes involved are stalking, torturing, and then bludgeoning. So this is someone who stalks their prey, they capture them, they torture them, and then they bludgeon them in some way that's typically not a gun.
It's very Ted Bundy.
It's very Ted Bundy. So yes, the predator was oftentimes a male, because at this point in the genre, you needed a level of physicality to overtake your victim.
Yeah.
Slashers ends up changing drastically. And now we know that, with movies like Scream and things, we have more than one predator oftentimes, right? There's more than one killer, which now when you watch horror films, you go, is there more than one?
Yeah, and I think Scream's really what did that.
It did.
Yeah.
Because now that's always planted in my mind when I'm like, is this person doing this solo?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we just watched Totally Killer.
Yeah.
Which, puts
we
that
were all asking that question the whole time.
Person? So that really didn't start till Scream. So where do we get into the psychology of why I think this specific genre does things to people psychologically? Slashers actually build tension, but mostly through atmosphere and suggestion. There are movies like Saw and some of these body horror movies that it's very in your face. And you could say that slashers, there's a lot of blood and things like that. But honestly, what really builds the tension in slasher is not the gore.
Right.
It's really the camera angle, the music or the silence, the atmosphere, and then the atmosphere and suggestion that the victim is being exploited, and thereby you as the viewer are being exploited as well. So there's a parallel experience happening there that I think you now lean into when you watch it, imagining yourself as victim. So this is a very different stance than the male audience that might be identifying as the perpetrator, there are different ways and different reasons we watch slashers. Obviously, we know that more women watch it from the viewpoint of being the victim. But again, in modern slasher, that is changing because we're having genders of all kind
Absolutely.
as the killer, but that was not the case in the origin. No. So it really brought up different feelings for people. And they've done studies on, when you watch a horror film, who do you feel most aligned with? And, they do that, which I think is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge focus on physical violence. And the other part of that is they're killing off victims one at a time.
Right.
Right. It's not this mass destruction.
Yeah, there's an intimacy to the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and even when you play horror video games, there's a reason why they're always slashers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's very rare. I have seen some true crime games and I've seen some psychological thriller games.
Sure.
But the fun ones are the slasher, which, by the way, folks, if you haven't seen, Five Nights at Freddy's is coming out as a film now, if you're into horror gaming. The last element that I'll talk about is it's sexually charged. And so there also lies that piece of intimacy. There is something inherently wrong about having a sexuality that somehow makes you immoral and makes you a target. And the killer oftentimes has suffered at the hands of either a babysitter or a caretaker having sex while something happened to them. So what do? They go back and they start killing everybody who's having sex. It's evolved, as we've moved into more modern slashers or like the neo slasher, like they were talking about in, the early 2000s. We have seen some tropes change. Women, non-binary folks play much more of a significant role in either being the killer or not always dying or being humiliated. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift in that. But as far as the formula goes, as far as what it elicits in us, the slasher remains to this day the same thing.
Yeah, they get very creative now. Everybody's trying to do a little something creative or find a new way. And, the Scream was, of course, a good example of that in the 90s, where they were taking the rules of the formula and making it something new and interesting and different. And we all appreciate that. And they're always still trying to do that. And I like that. I like the idea of the puzzle of the writer and the filmmaker trying to use the genre rules. In other words, the rules of vampires, the rules of werewolves, all the rules of the mythology that we as viewers will accept from you because there's a willing suspension of disbelief because it's, it's crazy stuff. It's stuff that doesn't actually exist, or, people who serial murder don't exactly act like slashers. They don't. It's different. It's hyped up. It's out of this world in many ways. It's very different from reality, like what Kathy was talking about, where it's like it's real enough to be scary because we hear these horrible stories, but it's so outrageous and elevated that you can relax and it's not real and it's not how humans interact. But I also think it's great to take the rules of the genre and then try to find something new. That's what all filmmakers are trying to do. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think that is being successfully done as we watch horror evolve. And I also think that some of these films are going back and using a lot of what was done in the 80s because that was a time where, there's a nostalgia to that, which people love. And then lastly, the something else I didn't mention is horror also allows itself to go into the supernatural. And it's not explicit. We don't say, Michael Myers is a superhuman and he's probably not really 100% human and maybe there's evil, but it's implied. He does things that a human being could never do. Right. And I think that's cool because it's always really subtle. It's not a sci-fi. It's not an action film. It's horror, but that little bit of supernatural allows them to break some rules. It allows the killers to be, how would that ever happen?
Yeah, I've always liked how eventually Jason comes back as, a zombie.
Yeah, every time.
Zombie Jason.
If you watch an action movie and someone does something really crazy, they're hanging on to a helicopter or whatever, you'll hear people be like, oh, come on, his hand would slip or whatever. It's less likely you'll hear someone say that in a horror film just because if you are a horror fan, you know that these motherfuckers aren't human. And you let that happen. And that's part of the fun, is really that suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, that's where your creativity can just go wild.
That's right. So those are some of the things that really make horror stand out, at least from our American slasher. I love Giallo for and not all the stories are great, but the Italian Giallo films, which have a lot to do with how we got to where we are, much of it is about the camera angles, the bright red blood. Everything's very exaggerated, very vibrant, very intimate. The music is really big. And basically we are a derivative of that. So if you go back and you watch some Giallo, it's so over the top and crazy, but in its own way, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, and I just want to share with you guys, we're in our 6th season now, at the beginning of our 6th season. And when we first started, so I think probably somewhere in the 2nd season, Kathy and I had conversation about Giallo, and Kathy just talked about how much she hated it and how awful it was and how it was so misogynistic. And, we were all up in our feminist feathers about Giallo and da-da-da. And it's just been really fun to watch over the course of these 4 or 5 years how both she and I and our horror tastes have shifted and changed and grown. And we've learned so much, because now she's like, Giallo's brilliant. And I love that.
You have to give it credit. Whatever you think of it. Like, can I sit down and watch a whole day of Giallo? Fuck no. But I could look at it and go, that's how we got our slasher.
Well, and it's like, oh, wait. It's literally the inception of my favorite genre.
That's right.
And I'm vilifying it. Wait, oh, hold on. Now I got to go watch some and figure it out. And that's what's so awesome about this journey for both of us, is we've learned so much, and, it's just cool.
I think for me, why the slasher is also my favorite is because I believe it's the genre that brings horror fans together.
Great.
And I think it's the horror community is rooted in it, whether it's your favorite or it isn't. When you go to conferences, when you go to all the festivals, it's the slashers that are the people who are signing.
Yeah,
it's the merchandise.
Absolutely. Yeah,
it's the Mount.
It's like the Mount Rushmore of horror, right? Is going to be like Jason and Michael and Freddy. And, it's like,
I've never seen another genre where women can age out and still have lines of people wanting their signature. It's amazing. It's wonderful, and I think that's where a lot of women in horror really got power from taking. And Barbara Crampton, by the way, I think it's her that. She was asked on, I think it's Into the Darkness, one of those, if she believed that by being a horror actor at her time was misogynistic and all that. And she has this really great reframe around it. She's like, it was fucking empowering. She's like, I was the center of it all. Without me, there would be nothing. And using my femininity to derail these guys. So she has this really great way of framing it, which I thought was awesome, because she did a ton of slashers. Yeah. Same with Dee Wallace. So I have my top 5, which is really hard to choose because there are so many out there. And there are many that I want to put on this list. But when I think about the ones that influenced me from either creep factor or just gave me more of an appreciation for the art, or just to me were really important milestones, that's sort of why I made
that makes sense.
Way that it did. So my first one is the 1974 Black Christmas. And anybody who's watched this show for a number of seasons, that movie to this day, talk about atmosphere. That movie's all fucking atmosphere.
Yeah, it's scary.
It's terrifying. The remake is a joke, but the 1974 is really scary. Then we have to go with 1978, John Carpenter's Halloween. I mean, enough said.
Yep.
Tourist Trap still scares the shit out of me. And mannequins in general scare the shit out of me. But the deaths in that are very, very, very brutal and suffocating and terrifying. Scream.
Yeah, Scream. You've always talked about Scream. And it's such a mile marker in the slasher genre.
And then my last one would be the first Giallo I ever saw. Thank you, Joe Bob Briggs. And that's Dario Argento's Deep Red. Talk about an atmosphere and a score that is so well done.
Yeah, it's on a lot of lists. It's a really, if you want to dip your toe in and get a sense of what Giallo is, whether you like it or hate it or don't like it or find it boring or think it's fabulous, like it's a representative.
It's a great starting point. What about you?
Halloween's on there. Scream's on there. No problem.
Yeah.
But I would, for me, and again, it's like depending on the day, right? But I would say in this moment in time, I would, Candyman is a visceral memory for me.
That's a good one.
From back in the day. Like I kind of went with ones that I kind of remember seeing.
Yeah.
And
that's a big part of it.
Imprinted on me in a bit. Because there's so many movies that don't.
Yep.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is definitely one that imprinted on me and was terrifying, and I still feel very icky when I watch it. Yeah. It doesn't terrify me anymore.
It's a tough one still, though.
Yeah, but it's a tough one. So TCM, Halloween, Scream, Candyman is definitely one of those. I liked Jordan Peele's version of Candyman, and I loved the original. So I'm a fan of that. And then I would add more recently, well, kind of recently, there's a French movie called High Tension.
Oh, yeah.
That is one of my very favorites because it's also complex in the story. But it's got a lot of gore and fun slasherness. And then I love the movie from 2011 called You're Next. That's a slasher that I really love. Again, a story. You're not sure what's going on. Red herrings, like it's really good and great kills.
I gotta look that up.
And great kills. So that would be my list today.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And obviously, like you said, I think a lot of it comes from remembering how it made you feel.
Yes. And like, I remember when I first saw High Tension. And I remember when I first watched You're Next, and I remember saying like, wow, okay, I love that, Yeah. So I'm remembering those first instincts of when you go, yes, whatever it is, you know. And sometimes that's a popular opinion, sometimes it's not.
Amazing.
All right.
Thanks for sharing.
Do we want some facts?
Yeah, let's do it. Why the hell not? We should give people their answers. I missed the beat.
I know you were talking.
Okay.
So we just gutturally just
spit out something. Number one, this horror actor was also a Broadway star. When he hit the silver screen, he could not escape his most famous role. He passed away in 1992.
I don't know. Heath Ledger? I don't really know.
Anthony Perkins.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually don't know when either one of those people died, so...
Heath Ledger was like 2008.
Okay.
Yeah. I just remember that because I was in I was in grad school.
And he wasn't really a horror actor, so I was just throwing out a name.
No, he couldn't get away from Psycho. Once he did all the stuff on Broadway, and the second he became Norman Bates, that was it.
And if you watch that movie now, because that could have made my favorite slasher movies, sure.
It really is a good one.
If you watch him, like, set aside the time frame and all of that doesn't quite jive for you. But if you watch him throughout the whole movie, the acting is really, I thought he was just excellent in that role. I don't think he gets enough credit.
My favorite scene in that movie isn't even a horror scene. It's when he's eating the candy corn. And he's talking to the detective or whatever. That whole scene and his everything, he's brilliant in that. And yes, we definitely need to mention Hitchcock's influence on slasher. My God.
Of course.
Number two, which famous horror actor was associated with best-selling author Stephen King, who contributed to the success of his acting career by promoting his films on social media?
I do not know.
Bruce Campbell.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I love the Bruce. I love me some Bruce.
That's pretty cool, yeah. Number three, the Glasgow smile is the term assigned to wounds that are the result of two cuts connecting someone's ears to the corners of their mouth. Dubbed this term because of its prevalent use among Scottish gangs in the 1920s and 30s.
And the Joker.
Which famous unsolved case made this mark infamous?
I just want to say, first of all, that when Kathy said the marks from ear, she did a little hand gesture.
From ear.
She needed me to know that it was right here, from the side of your mouth to the ear.
just so you know, it's here.
Yeah. That's the Black Dahlia.
That is the Black Dahlia.
And I remember that from our episode on the Black Dahlia. Okay.
Number four, if a human body is fed to the pigs, they will devour everything except what? Okay,
so I have a few guesses. Of course, at first I'm like, the bones. No, the bones are the best part. I kind of went for like teeth, nails, hair, but I don't know.
Teeth.
Which, okay.
Teeth, yeah.
There you go.
They spit out the teeth.
Yeah, those are the gross parts.
Yeah.
Well, and, not crunchy in a good way.
No. Number 5, Dick Smith, the Oscar-winning makeup artist for The Exorcist, mentored this horror director.
I do not know.
Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, giallo.
Giallo.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Happy Slasher.
Happy Slasher.
Happy
And listen,
Slasher Friday.
it's the right month for that shit.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Terror Talk. We very much appreciate you. Have a good day. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.